Welcome everybody on this beautiful Thursday to another episode of Leading Your Agency. And today I'm very, very happy to have with me an impressive person with an impressive track record in the agency landscape, Drew Schweppe, who is the head of global operations at SearchTides. Drew, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Benjamin.
Awesome. So the topic of today is onboarding, and not onboarding one or two different people, but onboarding at scale, right? Onboarding large numbers of people, and we're going to get to what numbers these are, and specifically then how you did it and how you would recommend doing it for other agency owners. But before we jump into that, tell us a bit more about what's your story approaching you joining SearchTides, and then also at the point where you joined SearchTides, what was the company like when you joined?
Absolutely. So, my background is not your traditional marketing business training. My background is actually in writing classical music. So, I was a musician by trade for a very long time. And then just the way that kind of transitioned into a career in operations and technology was a mix of things, but largely I can attribute it to just the realities of having your creation, whether it be music or an art installation, whatever it is for anyone that's creative, and turning that into an idea, turning it from an idea rather into an actual performance or something. So there's a lot required. And if you write music, like sure you can play it yourself, but if it's a larger piece, for example, like a symphony or something that requires multiple musicians, there's a lot of coordination that goes into making a performance happen and then getting people to come to the performances and marketing and things like that. So there's a lot of project management involved in being a successful self-made composer or musician. And at a certain point during my education, I saw a void in the market for an app or an all-in-one resource for music students. And I wanted to create this technology to provide to music students to come with future generations. So I developed a large team of musicologists, obviously developers, coders, designers, musicians to create this app. And all of a sudden I found myself managing 70 plus people across the world in different continents, different cultures. And I had a lot of skills that I accidentally picked up doing that. And through that, it just became something that I became very comfortable with. And the opportunity to join SearchTides, where I knew a little bit about search engine optimization, but nowhere near as much as I do now. But they were looking for someone to help, scale the company and to manage what was already a very global team when I joined. And I've been there since 2020. Late February. And then, as we all know, the world changed pretty significantly, but SearchTides was already set up as a totally remote company. And what it looked like when I got there was significantly different than what it looks like today. It was a much smaller team. And we had ambitious clients back then, as we do now, but maybe fewer of them. And it was, a combination of some freelancers, some people that had been part of the team for a longer amount of time. And we just needed to create a culture and a team that can operationalize under one plan and leadership. And that's what we've done.
Perfect. That sounds amazing. And I might want to get back to that music piece, maybe in this in this show, or maybe offline, because I found that very, very interesting. And I do agree that if you look into music and actually the process of bringing music from a written piece to an audience, receiving it in whatever form, live or in recording, there's a lot of steps that need to happen and many people involved. So I can imagine that there's a good training for project management. Okay, so when you joined SearchTides, so there was a bit of a team already, and what then was the trigger? So in early 2020, what was the trigger for basically this huge intake of new talent for the company? So
Yes.
I mean, assume business was picking up, but can you explain a bit the situation when you joined, and then how did this massive onboarding, massive new hiring spree for SearchTides. How did that develop? What was the business cost for that? And maybe also, can you give us a bit of the the numbers of how many people you were when you joined, and what did you do in the years after, and where you are today in terms of size of the organization?
Absolutely. So when I first joined, so this was a couple of phases. When I first joined, there were multiple teams that were kind of brought in together, but not necessarily working as a cohesive unit yet. People had different ways of doing things. And the first thing we needed to do was just get on the same page, understand how all of our colleagues work and how people interact. When I first got there, we worked with a lot of people based in the Philippines, and that was a 12 and sometimes 13-hour time difference. So just installing systems that allowed us to meet at a time that worked for everybody and stuff like that was kind of the beginning. And once the company was largely successful in what it did at a small scale when I had gotten there. And what we needed to do was take that to the next level, because what really brought on this need or desire to hire so many people was just simply opportunity. We had the opportunity not only to continue doing what we were doing, but to do it at scale, and also to explore other areas that maybe other agencies already do or don't necessarily have the resources to get into. And for us, it's always about staying ahead of the curve, always experimenting, R&D, and making sure that we are covering all bases in addition to our regular service offering. So that opportunity presented itself in multiple departments, all kind of coming to a bottleneck and emerging at the same time. And that was late 2020. We started talking about it. And then in early 2021 was where everything really picked up, and it was like, it's go time. We have this opportunity. The demand is there. We can meet it, but we know that we can make it even easier for ourselves, most importantly, and then also bring on new business as well. So we took it and been running with it since.
Wow, that's so cool. So then early 2021, you basically hit the start button and went ahead with the hiring. So walk us through what did that look like? How many people did you bring on? And then and I think this is the core of our conversation. How did you go about onboarding? And if you don't mind, maybe also a few insights about the selection and sourcing process, which you probably have been involved into as well, right? So maybe you can tell the audience a bit about where did you find these people, but then specifically, how many were they, and how did you go about onboarding them?
Absolutely. So what we decided to do, the plan was, okay, we have 2 or 3 different areas, and we know that we need these people to fill out those areas. So that maybe would have been something around 50 to 60 people. And then as you go, you kind of realize, we're going to need more because some people won't work out. We're going to need other roles that we hadn't thought about to support those people. And then the other thing, the real kicker, which I think is just really funny, is if you're going to be hiring 50 or 60 or close to 65 people, you can't do it by yourself, one person. It's a huge team effort, and you also need to hire people to help you hire people. So
the meta hiring.
And essentially, what you do very basically, and I'll get into the detailed version in a moment, but on a very basic level, you define what's needed, how many people you need, and then what that process looks like. And then you have your support team that come in and they support you to do that. So to explain that a little bit further, you do the first few interviews yourself, and you have your support staff with you on those calls, and then they take the next several interviews themselves. So you're basically doing a bunch of work, and then it's kind of like a waterfall situation. It ripples, and you just say, okay, we're going to do 4 or 5 interviews together, 3 interviews, whatever it is. And then you're going to give, my assistant friends, you're going to give us your feedback, and then we're going to get on the same page. Once we're on the same page, that person takes over the hiring for that. I move on to the next group of interviews with the next assistant or something like that. So that's kind of like the macro way of actually getting people now hired and interviewed. The sourcing is kind of a separate ball game, and you need to look at different avenues and different platforms to bring people on, depending on what kind of roles you need. And we could talk for a very long time about how to do that as well. But in short, for the sake of, brevity, basically you just decide what level person you need. So if you need a high management level executive person, you go to a headhunter or recruiter. If you need more of a data management or specialist level, you go to an Upwork, a Facebook, group, things like that, job boards, and you just kind of decide from there. But you can't really do any of that stuff if you don't have a really solid plan. So that's kind of where this onboarding method that I have been using for years prior to working at SearchTides, but really solidified and expanded upon this process comes from. So everyone's a fan of a cheesy acronym. So I've got one for my onboarding process, and it's called Simple Onboarding. So it's not like a perfect acronym, but it kind of works. So for me, a perfect onboarding needs these handful of things. So if we go through simple, it starts with S, which is structure. I'm just going to list the whole acronym first, and then I'll go through them in detail. So you need structure, you need immersion, you need a place to measure things, you need to be prepared, you need a loop for feedback, and you need to set expectations. So for structure, you need a serious plan of what this is going to look like. The worst thing you can do is just be like, oh yeah, these people are starting on Monday. We'll just figure out when they get here. We'll meet at 9 a.m. and we'll take it from there. That's literally the worst thing you can do. I mean, the worst thing you can do is not remember that they started, but it's not far off from that. So in terms of structure, you need to create, just create parameters that work for everybody, have meetings set up, have all your digital assets, just have a plan, essentially, is structure. And then, so next is immersion. I am a fan of theory to a point, but for me, for onboarding, especially in a digital role, you want them using your tools as fast as possible. You want them to understand the workflow and the way the communication works as well. So for me, you get them using your tools for the onboarding process. So an example of that would be what I do is I create an Asana template for any person that's new, and it is mapped out for the next, 30 to 60 days, exactly what that person is doing. And they, from day one, are using all of our tools, that aren't super technical niche tools. And that's how they learn the basic workflow of the company.
Yeah, I love that. If you don't mind me jumping in here real quick after the first two, because there's a ton of them to unpack here for me. So the structure really is what you would commonly refer to as your onboarding plan, right? Where you basically define what does my onboarding look like, correct? That's what you do there, and that's what you run in Asana.
Yes. So Asana is the mechanism of doing it. Structure, I would say, yes, that's the plan, but it also is just like a general human need to feel safe and like you are, accomplishing the right things. So that's how I would add on to your definition of structure. Yeah.
Perfect. And then, I mean, honestly, I couldn't agree more with the point of immersion, because over and over again, what I see very often in agencies, especially in ones that are still founder led, is that there's so much fear around, having people immersed to the actual work, exposing them to clients, letting them work in the actual infrastructure. They're shadowing and learning on theory for hours and days and weeks. And we typically tell them, you have to push them into the cold water. There's no real learning happening unless you do stuff, right? Everything makes sense if somebody explains it to you. Only when you start doing it yourself, that's when the questions come. So early immersion, 100%. It's such an important topic. I agree. So then, structure and immersion, S and I. The next is measure. So what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so kind of like what you were just talking about, actually, instead of having your new team member work on the live production version of whatever you're working on, you create copies and you give them mock tasks, so that they're the same thing that they will be doing in the future, but they're not, a high stakes moment where they might actually mess something up that's client facing. And the way you keep track of how they're doing is you literally have a rubric, just like teachers do in school. You say, okay, along with your Asana timeline, you have a Google Sheet or whatever it is that you want to use. That's like, okay, week 1, these are the things that they were supposed to do. How do they do? And you literally create a scaling system 10 is great or 5 is great. 1 being this person might not work out, or they need to do it again. And at the end of the first week, you look at your rubric and you say, okay, where is this person still struggling? Where are they excelling? And from there, you kind of adapt if necessary with your project in terms of more repetitions, or you say, yeah, they're on the course. And the other thing that my boss instilled to me was like, when you have someone that's great and they overtake the person that was great before, like that's your new standard that you need to adhere to. So you're always constantly changing your, not your expectations, but what you
consider great.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm serious. Like there's always a rubric that defines whether someone is on the right track or not. And a simple template can take you there.
I mean, so that's really, really interesting. A few follow-up questions here. Who is doing that? Who is doing this scale? This scaling? Is that you being overall responsible for the onboarding, or is that the functional lead that is responsible for that role that you're onboarding that person into?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the role. So in my experience, I made the rubrics for the first several roles, and then I would give my support team, here's the rubric for this role, make one that would be applicable to these other roles, and then I check it or whatever. And you basically just trickle it down. So you have a team of middle managers who are responsible for it. So at SearchTides, when someone comes on, you obviously have a hiring manager or someone that's going to lead the onboarding. And there are regular check-ins, which is part of the structure and the Asana project. And that person is the one evaluating as well.
Yeah, I think which at scale makes total sense, right? Because I mean, there's two things that are happening. One is just the sheer numbers don't work out for one person to do all of them. The second is also as you grow and tasks get more, get more narrow in the horizontal axis, but more deep in vertically, right? And there's more technical know-how involved. There's probably not one person in the company that has enough understanding of everything in enough detail to do that, right? To really say what is good or bad performance.
Sorry to interrupt. It absolutely should not be the head of operations or the CEO or the founder. It should be the people that are in the day-to-day and know what, because, as much as we like in operations to set systems and procedures, things change a little bit here and there, and people know what is acceptable and what is supposed, like what it's really like. So I'm not the best person to, a couple layers down, evaluate.
Yeah, perfect. And then the last question about this rubric, because I think it's really a fantastic tool to use onboarding, not only to check off certain boxes that you want people to pass by, but rather say, how are you doing, right? Would you also use that rubric or the results of that rubric to say, well, dear candidate, I think we're not a good fit. We thought we saw something else in you, but then if you see in the first week or two, results are just as on a level that makes you doubt that you can move them to a point where you're satisfied, would that also be basically your trigger to say, come on, let's part ways early and move on and find something better for both of us?
100%. The only caveat that I will add to that is probably the majority of the story, but the other part of it is then on the training manager, the hiring manager, like is the onboarding going as planned? And we think that with all this structure and this measurement tool, like it should be, but that's also an opportunity for us to be like, well, if this one person isn't doing so well on the rubric, then, they're probably not a good fit. But if these 5 people aren't doing so well on the rubric, then maybe we need to change something.
Yeah. So basically saying, looking at the totality of all these people that you walk through and saying if they're outliers, they're probably outliers because they don't perform well. If the general level of performance is low, it might be a problem in the onboarding or the briefing.
Exactly.
Okay. And so so we have the S, the A, and the M, and then there comes the P. So what is the next component?
Yeah. So preparation is basically just what it sounds like. It's that whole idea of, we'll figure it out when they get here. Like, no, you need to have everything very well organized. You need to make it as simple as possible. When you come to SearchTides, you get an email the day before you start working on a business day. So if you start Monday, you get it on Friday. and it has explicit instructions with all of your setup. So all you have to do is follow that email, and you basically just are immediately plugged into everything that you will need. And it just takes a lot of preparation on the company's side to do that. And it's the same for the hiring process too. So it's not just onboarding. The preparation here starts, I would say that the order of operations here is you put together the job role, responsibilities, and the onboarding, and then you start looking for the person that you need if it's completely defined, because the preparation is also the opportunity to find the holes in your systems, which I think we'll talk about in a bit. The other thing that I should mention about preparation is, like, in addition to hiring people, small or large, at scale, like, you are going to rely on other people at your company, and that's going to take away their energy from what they do day to day. And that's not something, that can really interrupt their workflow, is what I'm trying to say. So in order to respect your existing team and also to respect your new hires, you have to just be super prepared.
Yeah, I love that. And also, I mean, I really think that it's so smart to say, let's start hiring when we have an idea on how we onboard these people. Not only an idea, but a clear plan, right? Because onboarding doesn't start on day one, right?
Right.
Onboarding starts much earlier. And also when you say, okay, we send this email out on Friday with all the instructions, that means that everything is set up at that time, right? I mean, that person then has all their tool access. They have everything they need to basically from an infrastructure perspective to get started. And the full plan is in place at that time. So love that. And I also, as you say, we often see that onboarding can be such a drain on productivity of the existing team. And obviously that gets easier as you get bigger, because one person that you onboard at a company of 100 employees is certainly different than one person that you onboard in a company of 5 employees, right? But still, you have to be mindful of the workload that this causes, because if you do it well, it will involve personal interaction, right?
Yes.
With people. You can't automate onboarding, I find. I mean, what would you say, how much of the SearchTides onboarding program is people based, and how much is, let's call it automated, for lack of a better term, self-study stuff, things, tasks that the new hire can walk through themselves?
I don't know that I can put a proportion to it, but I can say that if you're doing it right, you want to make it appear to be 100% automated. So from a higher level, in like the hierarchical chart, the people, the CEOs, the founders, the senior managers, they should feel that this is automated. And the people that are doing the team leads and all of that, like, they should be the ones that are doing more of that personal touch. That's not to say that the higher ups shouldn't, check in, because I think that's really important too. But yeah, it is, to your point, you can't fully automate onboarding if it's going to be, at least the systems that we currently use and many agencies do, because for maybe development things, more technical nature stuff, I think there is an opportunity to get very close to automation, but you're always going to have questions, and you want to feel safe going to your manager asking about them too.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I agree with you. To put that in relation, I think you can. It depends on how fragment is such a negative word, on how how broken down your tasks are. The narrower the scope of a position, the closer probably you can get to a fully automated onboarding, right? The more complex, the more interdependent the position, probably the more difficult it is to automate fully, because then the judgment of human beings probably still is very relevant. Okay, preparation, love that point. And the last one is a loop for feedback. It was, I think, right?
Yeah. So there's two more. So there's a loop for feedback, which is, it's basically just feedback, but L has to fit into the acronym. So yeah, you want to have check-ins regularly. So I always schedule out way ahead of time. The new person needs to have 1 or 2 or 5 meetings a week, even if they're like for 10, 15 minutes, to be like, hey, how is it going? How are you feeling? Any questions I can answer? But on top of that too, look, when you're hiring at such scale, you're going to make some mistakes despite your best efforts. So what I did when I was hiring all those people, in addition to, having the people that would be working in those roles do the onboarding, I also had the support staff helping us hire these people and train them do that as well. So do the onboarding themselves, and you catch a few things there. But as you continue, and let's say you have 5 or 10 people on the same role onboarding, then if you see a question come up, it's going to be applicable to everybody. So you just want to have a dialogue going back and forth, which is like, oh, you know what, like this spreadsheet isn't shared with everybody, or this actually doesn't make sense. We need to alter the instructions. So things are going to happen. And the easiest way to make sure that people are feeling good, doing what they need to, and that your systems are working as expected is to just have, a conversation regularly. And that's why, to your earlier point, you really can't fully automate onboarding.
Yeah, love that. And also these feedback loops are really about speed, right? You wanna unearth these things quickly, especially if they're relevant for everyone. Which, as you say, if you onboard at scale, you onboard multiple people for the same role at once. There's probably many things that are applicable to everybody. Okay, exactly. Very cool. Okay, and then the last one, the E.
Yes, last one is expectations. So nobody likes to come into a job or anything where you don't really know what's expected of you. Like, you can say, hey, you're going to learn in the next 90 days, you're going to learn X, Y, and Z. That tells me nothing about what I'm supposed to do. And if I, yeah, sure, but how am I going to get there? And the expectations that we always set at SearchTides specifically is that you will not know everything on day one. You will not know everything maybe ever. And that is totally okay. And that we're in this together for the long run. So expectations are, we're going to have meetings at this time. You are going to follow your Asana project and get the things done that are due according to the timeline. And basically, I think, expectations is like takes pressure off and also makes people strive for something at the same time.
Love that, because this is honestly something that even in very advanced organizations with regards to onboarding, this is what is often falling short, right? Where we're basically telling people this is what we expect. So this is what you can expect, right? But also, what do we expect from you in the first 30, 60, 90 days, right? What onboarding success we want to see? What first achievements in your role do we expect from you, right? At which time? So I think clarity around that so important. Now let's quickly go back to the question of preparation. And you mentioned there, this is something that you also address in the online course we might want to talk about in a second. But you say basically onboarding, and I couldn't agree more, is a great tool to stress test your processes and improve them as you go. Can you elaborate a bit on how you were able, during that onboarding of these huge numbers of people, improve SearchTides processes?
Yes. So I think this is probably the golden ticket to staying ahead of the curve with all of this. And that is basically like, you need SOPs, you need, standard operating procedures, you need workflows and everything built out. But someone's got to build those. And in the beginning, it was me. Then I have operations managers and other team leads that help with it too, and they do a great job. But the cool thing is, like, when you document stuff, it forces you to actually look at it from a farther, zoomed out view. And during that time, you can realize, like, is this the best way to do it? Why do we do it this way? And so many times there's a reason. It's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But maybe we make a note about why we do it because someone else might have the same question. Or you say, wait, can we automate this? Or can we do this different? Can we reduce the flow that needs to, the pressure on somebody else, the workload? And when you start documenting things, you can start changing things and asking questions. And it just makes you way more efficient. And then the real secret to it is not only doing that one time, but let's say you need to scale up and you're going to do it in a couple rounds. So let's say you hire 3 people in your first round, you have to go back and you have to take the learnings and the feedback that they gave you and make adjustments for the next class of 3 or 5 or 10. And you need to go back and then you need to say, oh, they mentioned this one thing. And that's why you have your rubric. That's why you have your notes. And you say, oh, actually, we need to do this a little bit differently for the next group. Or maybe this meeting isn't necessary or it needs to be pushed back a different time, this learning. So you're just constantly improving your processes as you have a new class come on after the first time.
Yeah, I love that. And also I think there's two phases of improvement. One is the one, before you actually onboard, where you say, okay, how do we do things, right? And this exercise alone, I couldn't agree more, because we do this a lot with our clients, is this exercise alone helps a lot to really question and, shed light on how do we do things, and is this the best way of doing it, right? So this is the first phase. The second phase, we also often see, is that if you bring on people, they will have feedback, because probably, well, potentially they've done that task before somewhere else, right? So they usually have pretty good insights from an outside perspective when they're new, right in the onboarding or right after, to tell you, hey, listen, this feels weird. It's unnecessarily complicated. Why do you do it that way, right? So also a structured check-in with new hires, to, as you say, then go back to the drawing board and improve the process for the next batch of people that you onboard, can be very, very helpful.
Yeah, I'm glad you agree. It's worked great for us.
Awesome. So that's really fantastic. If you, Drew, had to give the agency owners that are listening one takeaway to implement tomorrow, start implementing tomorrow, maybe, yeah. What would it be out of the things that we've discussed? Structure, immersion, measuring things, preparation, frequent feedback loops, and expectations. Is there one thing that stands out for you that is the basis for everything that's most important for you?
Yeah, it's a tough one, because I think they're all very important, but I think that's at the core of it all is a structure, because that's going to require you to actually think about it and prepare to a point. Any preparation is better than none. So if you have a structure, and even if you do what I don't agree with, which is in 90 days you're going to be onboarded and learn, and you'll know these things, at least somebody, maybe be you as the founder or your team leader, whoever it is, someone's going to have to build that out, or the person's going to have to be super proactive. So you need to have a structure. That's the most important thing, that will get you where you want to go. If you can do the rest of the acronym too, that's the way to do it. But you don't want to just be like, oh, they'll just trail me. I'll do some screen shares. I'll send some information. You want like a real structure, and you want to set deadlines. So that's where I would start.
Awesome. Great recommendation. Drew, how can people learn more about this topic, if they want to dive a bit deeper into this, into onboarding at scale?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've written pretty extensively about it. I have a blog at streamlinedscaling.com, and I'll put it into the chat. I additionally have an ebook that breaks down the simple onboarding method even further. And if you want the actual templates I use, literally the exact same process that I do, I have a full online course that you can do. It's relatively short. You can, crush through it in a couple hours, and it's going to show you exactly the way to follow this to a T. And it's very customizable. So it does have templates for you, but you can easily adapt them so that you can make it work for what you want to do and what your requirements are.
That's fantastic. So we'll share all these links after this in the notes. And Drew, really, really impressive. I think also the system is very, very rounded and very, comprehensive, and yet still simple. So I think really this is a very good framework to work off on when you onboard your next people at scale. Thank you for all the insights that you've shared. And yeah, people obviously also can reach out to you on LinkedIn, I'm sure, to just get in touch and connect and have a conversation around this topic. And I do recommend go check out the ebook and the online course. We share the links, and I think this is very, very good food for thought, and then also food for framework inside of your agency. Drew, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Benjamin. It's been great. Talk again soon.
Talk soon. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.